I stood in the middle of the Riverbend Festival crowd, lights blazing across the stage, reflecting off the faces of two people who once meant everything to me, my ex-wife and her powerful lover. They smiled, unaware that in just a few minutes, their perfect world would crumble before everyone's eyes. For 6 long months, I planned every detail, every move, every word. And as I wrapped my fingers around a microphone, I finally whispered to myself, "It's time." My name is Ethan Cole, 38 years old, a construction engineer born and raised in Riverbend, a quiet city that never felt the need to rush. For most of my adult life, I believed I had everything I'd ever wanted: a stable job, a comfortable home, and a wife who made every room brighter the moment she walked in. Her name was Lena. She worked in public relations for Damien Shaw Financial Group, one of the city's most prestigious firms. Damien Shaw himself was the kind of man people couldn't ignore: polished, confident, and dangerously charming. Whenever he entered a room, conversations paused, and eyes followed. I had met him once at a company event. He'd shaken my hand, smiled too long, and complimented Lena's professionalism. At the time, I brushed it off as flattery from a powerful man. Looking back, I realized it was something else entirely, the first warning I failed to notice. For years, our marriage was good. Not perfect, but steady. We laughed over burnt pancakes on Sundays and took long drives along the river every autumn. I trusted her completely. Maybe that was my first mistake, believing love was enough to keep temptation away. Then, little things started to shift. Lena began leaving home earlier and coming back later. She said her department was expanding, that she was handling new clients. I believed her. But soon, she started dressing differently. Sharp suits, red lipstick she never wore before, perfume that smelled expensive and unfamiliar. Her phone was always locked. When I walked into a room, she'd flip it face down as if hiding a secret. I told myself it was nothing, that we were both just busy adults, living parallel lives that occasionally crossed paths at the dinner table. But the silence between us grew heavier, like a fog I couldn't see through. One Friday night, I found a first crack in the facade. Lena had left her purse on the counter before heading to bed. I wasn't snooping, not at first. But when I reached for my wallet, I saw a receipt from a high-end restaurant, 2 entrees, 1 bottle of imported wine. The date and time matched perfectly with the evening she told me she had a client meeting. I remember standing there, staring at the paper, feeling something cold crawl up my spine. Maybe it was anger, maybe disbelief, or maybe the realization that my life, our life, was not what I thought it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory, every moment replayed in my head, twisted and rewritten by suspicion. Was every late meeting a lie? Every smile rehearsed? But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention to the details, the inconsistencies, the half-truths. I told myself I needed proof before I accused her of anything. What I didn't know then was that the proof I would eventually find would lead me far beyond betrayal. It would drag me into a world of corruption, greed, and revenge, a world where love wasn't the only thing at stake. From that night on, I became an observer of my own marriage. Every glance, every phone vibration, every late meeting became data points in a growing investigation. Lena thought I was distracted with work, but the truth was I was studying her more closely than any blueprint I'd ever drawn. She started coming home later and later, sometimes past midnight, with excuses rehearsed to perfection. The campaign launch got delayed. Damien wanted to review the proposal again. The client insisted on dinner. Each explanation sounded plausible, but her tone was too polished, too carefully casual. The kind of tone people use when they've practiced their lies. Her phone became her fortress. It was always face down, protected by a new passcode I wasn't supposed to know. One evening, while she was showering, I saw the screen light up. A message popped through the lock screen from someone labeled simply DS. "The transfer's ready. Same place tomorrow." My heart froze. The initials, the phrasing, the secrecy, it all pointed to one person, Damien Shaw. But I forced myself not to react. Not yet. I needed confirmation. The next morning, I called Tommy Grant, my oldest friend. He worked in the security department at Shaw Financial, managing surveillance systems. I told him it was urgent, that I suspected something, but I couldn't explain fully over the phone. We met that night in his car outside a diner, like a scene from a cheap detective movie. When I told him my suspicions, he didn't laugh. Instead, he said quietly, "You're not the first to bring up rumors about Shaw. Give me a few days." 2 nights later, Tommy handed me a flash drive. "Don't ask how I got this," he said. "You didn't hear it from me." At home, I plugged it into my laptop. The footage showed Lena leaving the building after hours. At 10:43 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled up. Damien stepped out, glanced around, and opened the passenger door for her. She smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in months, and slid into the car. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Part of me hoped there was an explanation, that maybe it was a business ride. But the way she looked at him, that wasn't business. That was something else. After that, I started collecting everything: bank statements, restaurant receipts, emails she forgot to delete from our shared computer. I even backed up her cloud account under the guise of fixing a sync issue. What I found went beyond infidelity. There were transfer records, encrypted messages, and invoices marked consulting fees sent to companies that didn't exist. When I tried tracing one, it led to an offshore account under a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. I wasn't a lawyer, but I wasn't stupid either. This wasn't just cheating. This was money laundering. I needed more proof, something undeniable. So I started talking to people quietly. Mr. Nate, my site foreman, told me he'd once seen Damien visiting one of our company's construction sites with Lena, claiming to be inspecting partnership projects. There were no such projects. Then, Mrs. Folsom, our elderly neighbor, mentioned she'd often seen Lena getting into a shiny black car with tinted windows parked across the street. Always when I was working late. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, an ugly picture of deceit, greed, and betrayal. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted the truth to destroy itself, not just be accused. I bought a small recording device and kept it in my jacket. I began following her car after work, staying far enough not to be noticed. For 3 nights, she went straight home. On the 4th, she turned onto the expressway, heading downtown. I followed from a distance, pulse racing. She parked outside the Westmore, an upscale hotel known for hosting corporate executives, and for its discretion. Damien's Mercedes was already there. They entered together, laughing. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My breath came shallow, controlled. I took out my phone, snapped photos, time-stamped them, and whispered to myself, "Keep going, Ethan. Don't break now." I didn't know it yet, but that night was just the beginning. What started as a husband's suspicion was about to unravel a criminal empire. That night, I followed them to the Westmore with the engine idling and the seat heater on, pretending to be a man who'd only driven out for air. From my car window, I watched Lena and Damien step into the hotel lobby, hands clasped like lovers who just won something. He kept looking at her the way a man looks at a prize he's bought. Possessive, satisfied. She leaned into him and laughed. That same laugh I used to think was reserved for our private jokes. My stomach dropped. I snapped a dozen photos with my phone, each flash a small, private indictment. The timestamps told a story I could not unsee. Back home, I paced until my feet ached. Anger was a hot thing, but anger alone wasn't enough. I needed leverage, and leverage needed facts. I spread the receipts, the screenshots, the camera stills across the kitchen table like a strategist mapping an enemy fortress. Every single one fit together too neatly. Late-night transfers, off-book invoices, shell company names in tiny fonts. There was a darkness to it that made my hands shake. I had an old lead, Agent Carl Rhodes, a federal investigator who'd once worked a contract on a bridge project where I'd serve as liaison. We'd crossed paths years ago in parking lots and courtrooms. He'd always been direct, the kind of man who could smell trouble the way others smell rain. I found his number in the back of an old file and called. He didn't pick up, but he texted back within the hour. "Stop by. 9 p.m. Bring proof." I drove to a diner on the edge of town where he liked to sit alone with black coffee. He looked 20 years older than his badge said, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't faded. I laid everything out: the transfers, the offshore names, the footage of Lena slipping into Damien's car. He moved through the documents without surprise, like a man assembling a puzzle he'd seen before. "We've had Shaw under a low boil for months," he said quietly, tapping a corner of a printed spreadsheet. Insider trading chatter, off-the-books transfers funneling into shell companies. He's careful and dangerous. We needed someone small to trip him up. You just handed us the spark. He didn't promise arrest that night. He told me the case needed to be airtight. Timelines, provenance, chain of custody. He warned me not to do anything stupid. Don't confront him publicly, don't threaten, and for God's sake, don't try to entrap him. He also said something that sounded like mercy and like a challenge. If you want to do this clean, you've got to be surgical. Surgical was exactly the plan I drew up on a napkin under the diner's flickering neon. I would pretend ignorance. I would be the dutiful husband who fixed faucets and paid bills. All the while, I would secure every asset that was truly mine, lock down our home, and document everything with a precision that would stand up in court. That week I moved in silence. I went to the bank under the pretense of updating account information and spoke with a manager I'd known for years. Quietly, legally, I placed our joint accounts into a mode where withdrawals required additional verification. I made sure payroll for my small contracting crew continued uninterrupted. A man has to have his tools and his crew. Next, I replaced the locks on our house with the same hands that had tightened bolts on 1,000 scaffolds. There was something vindicating about taking a wrench to the doorknob of a life you'd built and bolting it closed for the person who had been dismantling your world. At night, while Lena slept, or thought she did, I copied files from our shared laptop onto multiple encrypted drives. I opened apps she forgot to close, exported old emails she'd hidden in folders, and created a chronological archive of her interactions with Damien and his network. I kept a secure backup in a safety deposit box under a false name, a coward's paranoia that now felt like prudence. I also staged appearances, small, believable actions that would never set off alarm bells. I took longer routes to work. I showed up late to breakfast with an apology about traffic. To friends and neighbors, everything seemed normal. To Agent Rhodes, it looked like a man doing his part in a long, quiet investigation. There were moments I feared a misstep. Once a car I didn't recognize idled across the street, engine humming, windows slightly tinted. For an hour I watched and waited. Lena came home, and the car left. I called Rhodes and left a message with a license plate. He called back with an address an hour later, a property investment listed to one of Shaw's shell companies. They were watching each other. They were as cautious as we were cunning. When the day came that I knew the investigation would move from paperwork to indictment, I felt a strange calm. I had become a man who knew what he had to lose and what he had to save. I hadn't gone out seeking to ruin anyone's life for pleasure. I wanted accountability. I wanted the truth to have consequences. As the sun set on Riverbend and the festival banners unfurled along the river walk, I tucked the last drive into my jacket pocket and whispered to myself, "Be surgical, Ethan. Let them fall on their own weight." When Lena pulled into the driveway that evening, the porch light painted her face in a harsh yellow. She was still in her work coat, hair pinned up in that hurried bun she perfected on late nights. I stood on the front step, the new lock glinting where my old thumb had fit for 15 years. I watched her fumble for her keys, watched her expression crumble the second she realized the door wouldn't open. "Ethan, what is this?" "Open the door," she called, voice thin and high with panic. She rattled the knob like someone trying to force an explanation out of a locked chest. I folded my hands and said nothing for a moment, letting the silence do the work I had rehearsed. When I finally spoke, my voice was flat and calm, quieter than she deserved. "You told me once you didn't need me," I said. "You said you wanted out. I'm just making that true." Her face shifted through 100 colors in a single breath, confusion, anger, pleading. "You can't do this, Ethan. This is insane. We can talk. Please." She gripped the knob until her knuckles white-knuckled. "I am your wife." "Tense past," I answered. "You made that clear." I reached into my pocket and tossed a small, ugly thing, a USB drive, at her feet. It landed with an unapologetic clack on the concrete. She bent, picked it up with trembling fingers, and opened it on my kitchen counter while I stood just inside the doorframe, the safety chain clicking like a tiny drumbeat. On the screen, photos scrolled. Lena laughing with Damien in a private dining room. The two of them leaving the Westmore. Screenshots of messages with the initials DS, lines in bank statements showing transfers that matched the timestamps of their meetups. PDF after PDF of invoices routed through shell companies with names so bland they looked designed to be invisible. "You can't do this," she repeated, voice breaking. "You can't. Who gave you that? Who did you tell?" "I sent copies to someone who will handle it properly," I said. "I didn't want to drag you through the mud, but you left me no choice. Agent Rhodes has everything he needs. He asked me to preserve the chain of custody. This is how you get truth to stick." The look on her face then, disbelief curdled into fury, was unreadable. She slammed a palm into the counter. "You'll regret this. You don't know what you're playing with. Damien isn't someone you cross." "Oh, I know exactly who he is," I said. "And now everyone else will, too." She lunged toward me, not to strike, but to plead. "Ethan, please. I made a mistake. We can fix this. I'll leave him. Her words collapsed into sobs. For the first time in years, I felt a sliver of the man who had once cradled her through fever nights. I closed the chain, locked the door, and walked away. A week later, Riverbend's annual River Festival lit up the park. It was the kind of community event where people wore shorts and beer-stained smiles, where local bands warmed up on the riverbank and kids chased glow sticks. Damien Shaw was the headline sponsor, his corporate banner stretched across the main stage, logos flanking the municipal seal. He loved being seen as a benefactor. It was clean, antiseptic PR for someone who trafficked in gray areas. I stood among ordinary faces, a sea of blankets and folding chairs, a man with a small recorder in his pocket, and 2 encrypted drives stitched into a jacket no one would notice. My hands didn't shake. They had work to do. When Damien took the microphone, white teeth flashing in the stage lights, the crowd cheered politely. He smiled like he owned every cheer. He began his practice speech about community, about investment and responsibility. My pulse was a steady drum in my ears, but otherwise I was composed. I waited for the right cadence, the right moment when his eyes searched the crowd and landed on mine. He lingered, the smile faltering for a breath. He recognized me. That was enough. I moved then, as if drawn by a rope. Security, used to controlling unruly teenagers and stray pets, watched me approach with the casual disdain you reserve for nuisance. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it, exactly twice. Once under my breath in my garage, and once with Agent Rhodes, who gave me the go-ahead and the cautionary nod. "Excuse me," I said, stepping onto the stage platform like a man who'd lost his patience. "Damien, I need a word." The microphone in my hand hummed to life. Heads turned. The murmur of the crowd fell into an expectant hush. Damien's smile snapped tight. "This is a public event," he said, with a politeness that was a blade. "Sir, you can't." "Actually," I said, and clicked the button on the small projector I'd wheeled behind the speakers with the help of a distracted volunteer. "I think they can." The lights dimmed, and the large screen exploded into images. Bank transfers, time-stamped emails, a photo from the Westmore, Lena's name on corporate ledgers. The air seemed to go thin. Someone in the front row swore softly. Phones came up. Heads swiveled toward the bannered logo that now had criminal intent flashing across it. Damien lurched forward, tried to reclaim the narrative. "What is this?" "Security." He reached for the projected laptop, but the crowd's attention was a physical force holding him back. I spoke only once to the gathered riverbank, voice steady, barbed with the months of quiet rage. "This man," I said, pointing at Damien, "has been funding a network that siphons money from clients and routes it through shell companies. He used his position to manipulate markets, and he used people, including the woman I once called my wife, as part of his scheme. I've handed everything to the authorities." I clicked through pages of highlighted documents, names circled, transactions traced. Faces in the crowd leaned in, hungry for the truth served loud and public. On the ground near the stage, Lena's mouth moved soundlessly. Her face had gone paper white, mascara streaking, the polish of her public life cracking into panic. Damien's jaw worked. The practiced calm had fled. Security moved to the front of the stage, too late for optics. A few officers, plainclothes men Agent Rhodes had placed nearby, closed in behind him. I felt something release inside me then. Not triumph, so much as relief. The man who had stood between us, between me and the truth, was losing his footing in front of the town he'd bought with image and money. Lena looked at me like someone seeing a ghost. I raised my chin and let the screen speak for me. Facts, dates, bank numbers, clean, sober proof that left no room for denial. The riverfront echoed with murmurs that turned into calls for answers. And in that swell, their empire began to crack. The next morning dawned with a strange, bureaucratic quiet. I woke to the sound of news alerts, the kind that empty a room faster than guilt ever could. By noon, the headlines had names. Damien Shaw arrested. Federal indictments follow. They flashed across my phone in a frantic, numbing cascade. I watched the televised footage as suited agents moved through the marble lobby of Damien's office, carrying boxes and evidence like trophies. The footage was clinical and final. He did not look like a villain in a movie. He looked human, cornered, and ordinary, and that made the fall worse. I expected a sense of vindication. Instead, there was a hollow that stretched behind my ribs. Justice moved with the heavy gears of institutions, deliberate, ordered, and, in the end, impersonal. Damien would be processed, arraigned, and, if the charges stuck, led away in handcuffs. The main theater of the public spectacle had closed. The quieter work of courts and auditors would begin. Lena's world unraveled in minutes and months. Her firm put her on administrative leave, pending investigation. The colleagues who had once smiled and clinked glasses at after-work events now avoided her gaze. Messages piled in my inbox from people I barely knew, some angry, some nauseatingly sympathetic, and at least 3 reporters asking for comment. My inbox felt like a courtroom where everyone else was expecting me to perform. She tried to call me the morning after the arrest. I saw her name flash on my screen. For a second, something old and irrevocable surged in me. Then I tapped decline and sent the number to the block list. My lawyer told me there were prudential reasons to keep distance, evidence integrity, potential testimony, my own safety. The emotional side of it felt like armor that fit too neatly. As the weeks stretched, so did the consequences. Federal agents interviewed Lena. Her cell phone became evidence. Bank accounts were frozen pending the forensic accounting that would decide how complicit she had been. Some charges were speculative at first. Proximity is not guilt, but the paper trail was merciless, and her denials grew thin. Friends who had once been dinner companions now texted in ellipses and excuses. Her social calendar emptied like a stage after a final curtain. I sold the house, the place where we had stacked boxes of belongings, argued about paint colors, and once watched rain slide down the kitchen window while we planned vacations. A buyer came with a check and a polite handshake. A couple starting out, eyes shining in a way that softened something in me I had thought broken beyond repair. I signed the papers, handed over the keys, and left the threshold cleaner than I had found it. I moved out of Riverbend because the town had become a museum of our failures. I bought a modest place in a coastal town 2 hours down the road, a narrow clapboard house with a porch that creaked like it remembered better weather. There's a clarity in waves, a rhythm that erases small things and exposes what's left. I woke to gulls and salt on the morning air. I fixed the leaky gutters myself and painted the trim a stubborn, humble blue. My crew and I took a job on a seawall repair, the work honest and steady. I slept harder and deeper than I had in years. On a night when the moon hung low and silver over the water, I took from a small box the last photograph I had kept, a wedding portrait where Lena and I were young and promising, smiling as if the world had promised us fairness. I'll unmatch. The flame trembled like it felt the weight of memory. For a moment, I hesitated. Regret is a reflex that lives in the bones of most men who have loved badly or been loved badly in return. Then I lowered the photo into the flame. The paper blackened, curled, and released a thin, pungent scent that felt oddly sacramental. I watched as the faces I had once loved reduced to ash, as if dissolving the last, brittle hope that had kept me tethered to that version of us. It was an ending that felt both vicious and necessary. I scattered the ashes into the ocean 2 days later, watching the tide take them away in small, indifferent waves. People asked if I felt triumphant. I did, in moments, when the evidence landed and agents took their turns reading names that had been whispered around boardroom tables. But I also felt weary in a way that had nothing to do with victory. stripping a house of its ghosts, selling a car, unliking pictures on an account. These are not theatrical acts. They are slow, administrative griefs that demand no applause. Months passed. The legal wheels turned. Damien faced indictments that made front-page news, and his assets were tied up in freezes and forfeiture proceedings. Lena was offered a plea arrangement on lesser charges tied to negligence and participation in certain transfers. Whether that would carry jail time depended on cooperation and the discretion of prosecutors. The scandal buried careers, and reputations like stones dropped into deep water. I took up mornings walking the shoreline with a thermos, sometimes stopping to help a neighbor fix a fence. I read books I'd meant to read years ago. I drank coffee on the porch until it cooled, and let the silence grow into something tolerable. I dated once, very briefly, and discovered how disorienting honesty could feel in a world that normalizes half-truths. Mostly, I learned to be alone without the insistence of being lonely. At night, when the house was quiet and the moon threaded silver across the water, my voice would quietly narrate the day to myself. Part accounting, part confession. I would think of the ethics of exposure. Whether a man has the right to ruin another's life in the interest of truth. I thought often about silence, how easy it had been to choose and how costly it became. People say marriages die of lies. Maybe that's true in part, but I've come to think the real rot begins long before the lies. It's the silence that lets those lies take root. I had chosen, for a long time, to be quiet. I mistook patience for peace, neglect for tolerance. When I finally